Are you someone who struggles to build new habits? Do you find yourself having the motivation to want to make a change, whether it's you want to lose weight, you want to start being healthier, you want to have a better quality of life, but still there's these bad habits or these bad patterns that you get stuck in? If that's where you're at, today we're going to show you a simple breakdown of how to break some of your worst habits. Now, the ultimate goal here is that you start to build awareness around some of the patterns that might already exist, and ultimately you start to practice taking new actions. Now, my name is Brian Pickowitz. I'm one of the head coaches here at the Fitness Project, and over the last decade, I have studied mindfulness, personal development, and psychology in different ways to really help understand how to help people get healthy. It's really easy to give someone a strategy. Here's how to work out, here's how to diet. But what happens when they don't take action? That's been one of the things I've obsessed about for the last decade, and there's some real simple practices that have been impactful for thousands of our clients, but also this is something that I've used to transform my own life. So today, I want to really start by understanding first, what is a habit? Why do we have them? Why do we fall into them, right? Even though we have desire to change. And then more importantly, how can we start to understand the cycle that each habit lives in and then take productive actions forward? So if you love this video, if you love this talk, please give us a thumbs up. Please leave your comments as you're engaging in it. And also treat this like a masterclass. Treat this like something that you're really discovering something about yourself with. And the most important thing is see this as a practice. Oftentimes we believe change is linear. It happens in a moment. And in a lot of times, the first step is that moment. We make a decision to get healthy. We make a decision to take a risk on our business. All of these are decisions that change the course of our life, but then from there, we have to keep making those small decisions. And that's why things like the 1% rule, which we've talked about oftentimes on our podcast and on the show, have been really helpful because they set the foundation for growth. Back to today, though, we're going to talk about habits. So what is a habit? Well, a habit is a routine behavior that happens almost automatically. There was a Duke study that found that up to 45% of our behaviors can be those routines per day. So that means that every day we are just doing things unconsciously out of repetition. Now, why do we have habits? Essentially, it's your brain's way of saving energy and space. Think of it as you're going through life and your brain is engaging with all these problems. And some problems, like how to put on your shirt or how to brush your teeth or how to drive to work, we start to realize are things we've already faced. They're problems we've already learned how to solve. So your brain creates an automatic routine for how to solve that problem. And the more that we face that problem, the more automatic that habit or that action gets conditioned. So you can think there's a stimulus, there's a response, and the more that we get that stimulus, the more we find a way to respond, the more that habit gets ingrained. So when we talk about building awareness around habits, we have to start to understand that it's not just stimulus and response, but there's also a cycle, right? And this comes from James Clear's book, Atomic Habits. So there's a cue, and that cue leads to an urge or craving. And then there is the typical response or the action. And then on the other side, there's a reward, right? So we have our cue, we have our urge or our craving, we have our action and response, and then there is a reward. So the reason why we want to start understanding the cycle is because this is really where we need to start building awareness. Awareness is a really important word and foundational building block for any habit, because without awareness there can't be change, right? If you're driving your car and you don't realize you're on empty, there's not that signal, you'll keep driving it until you break down on the side of the road. It's the same thing with any of these different habits. We need to start practicing becoming aware, because once we become aware, we can then take a productive action forward. Where do we build awareness, though? Do we just have to see the cycle? Well, there's really 4 areas that we're going to start building awareness with, and that's where you can start with right now. So you can think, what is the habit that I want to break? You can write that down. What is the habit I want to break? What is the habit I want to start to remove or replace? And the first thing we're going to do, just even through that question, is we're going to build awareness. I start using different colors because I like to break up the mix a little bit. We're going to build awareness around our action. What do we do? I like to call this the first layer of awareness, because if you ask any person, well, what do you typically do? What's the habit? Like, oh, well, I late night snack, or I smoke a cigarette, or I stress eat, or I yell at my kids. That's a habit, right? That is the action that we typically are aware of. Now, the first layer here, the second layer of awareness is going to be identifying the cue. Now, cues or triggers can be physical, right? They can be something that happens. I receive an email. It can be a space, right? An environment. Late at night, I sit on the couch. Cues can also be thoughts, right? I started to think about all the things I had to do in the day, and then I got stressed. And there can also be emotional cues too, right? Like I start to feel anxious, and then therefore I start to engage in a behavior that corresponds with that emotion. So I want to build awareness around the action. I want to build awareness around the cue. The second thing I want to build awareness around is the urge or the craving. Now, when it comes to urge or craving, you can almost start to connect the feeling in your body with the action that's about to happen. Again, we're just building awareness. So if you think of the habit that you want to break, you can say, hey, what do I do? What are some of the cues or triggers? Is it the time of day? Is it the email? Is it sitting at the TV late at night? Is it sitting in my car, right? Is there a habit that's associated with the car? And then what do I feel? What does my body feel like? The thing that's fascinating about the body is going to tell you what's happening in the mind, right? So if you think of your stress response, it's an unconscious response to an external threat. So when we think of any kind of habit, it's that feeling in our body that is in that craving or urge. Now that craving might feel like, ooh, I want to get up from my desk. Ooh, I want to go grab the snacks. But we want to start to build awareness around how it feels, right? How does it feel before I engage? And the last piece I want to build awareness around is the reward. What is the reward of the habit? What is the reward of the behavior I'm engaging in? What does the urge make me want to seek? Right? And now the reason why it's important that we start to look at rewards is the end goal of every habit is a reward. If it wasn't rewarding, we wouldn't repeat it. And now not all rewards seem positive if we start to think of like, well, why do I smoke? Well, it's probably that it is rewarding. It might not seem rewarding in the long term, but in the short term, it relaxes you. I had a client one time that I was helping break her habit of smoking, and we observed that the cue was the morning coffee. The cue was also the car. The cue was a stressful email at work. The cue was anxiety, like anytime she started to feel stressed or anxious. And we started to associate what the feeling was. Right? What is the feeling? The feeling, the urge, is this intense, like, I tighten up, I tighten up, I tighten up. The craving is also the anticipation of the cigarette. Like, I need a cigarette. Well, what was deeper? Oh, my body changes. And then I said, okay, what do you do? I said, well, there's a lot of actions I do. The first thing I do is I reach for my pack of cigarettes. And then I pull out a cigarette. And then I put it in my mouth. And then I light it. And then I deep breathe. So, okay, what happens when you deep breathe? Well, the reward for her was relaxation, right? So a lot of times the rewards, we like to say, well, the reward is, I sit late at night and I get something sweet. So that's great. That's the first layer of awareness. But what do you actually feel like? Or what is the change in your emotions as a byproduct of that food? Are you able to connect with yourself deeper? Do you feel a sense of peace? Do you feel a sense of relaxation? I know for a lot of our clients at the Fitness Project, this cycle, say late night eating specifically, it's the only time that they get by themselves. They have a business, they have a career, they're engaging with people all day, they have kids. And so that time block, let's say the cue is 11 p.m. or 9:30 p.m. The urge is to grab some food, right? I have a craving for food. They eat, and then what happens is they start to feel relaxed. And what's so important to realize is this is something that gets conditioned over decades. It's not just something that happened overnight, right? And so the reason why we want to start to build awareness around the reward is because that's going to show us what we do next, right? Now, we talk about breaking a habit. There's really two options. We can come through one path and we can eliminate. We can eliminate the behavior altogether, which I'll talk about in a moment, or we can replace. So when it comes to elimination, what this is going to look like is essentially you can remove the cue. You can make it really dissatisfying to engage in the behavior, right? And this is going to be important if you feel like, hey, I've tried some different mechanisms and I just can't do it, right? You think about someone who's like, oh, I just have a pack of cigarettes in the house just in case. Probably not helpful. That might need to be a habit that is eliminated. And I think it's important to realize, like, if you're talking about late night snacking, for example, or stress eating, it's not that you have to eliminate eating. It's just you might eliminate some of the cues. You might eliminate some of the triggers. For example, I have a rule in my house. I don't keep ice cream in a tub in my house. And the reason why is because I know that I am a fairly large man. I can get away with eating 1 or 2 or even 3 servings of ice cream. And so long as I haven't eaten like a jerk the rest of the day, it doesn't really derail my overall health. But I know that if I do that, I tend to feel like garbage. I tend to sleep like crap. I do tend to jump up in weight. I do put on a couple of pounds. And so I realized, like, hey, ice cream is something that I just need to eliminate from my home, right? I need to eliminate it from my home so I can't get it at all, right? It's really helpful for me to have that awareness. Now, you might have your own habits. You're like, hey, I need to remove the pretzels. I can't buy pretzels anymore because pretzels, when I keep them in the house, I just eat them. You might also say, you know, there's a replacement side to this. You might also make the cue a little bit more difficult. So you might make it more difficult to engage in. Simply put, you might take the pretzels into the basement and put them in a cabinet and say, oh, well, now it's really hard to go get them. Now, this can work to some extent because there's more space between the trigger, the urge, and the response, right? You think about, oh, well, the trigger happens. I want pretzels, so it's late at night. You start to urge and crave, oh, you know, I kind of like some pretzels. And then you have to think of all the actions that happen before you even get the reward. Now, the fascinating thing is that there's thousands of actions or maybe dozens of actions that happen. But even though we aren't inherently getting the reward, we're anticipating the reward. So we can still BS ourselves and fall into the same pattern, which is why elimination as a concrete rule can be really helpful, right? Just, I don't do that. I just don't keep it in the house. Boom. But what do we do when we can't control the cue? What do we do when our kids want the snacks? What do we do when the stressful email happens? What do we do when it's outside of our control in this department? Because what happens is we get the same cue, we get the same trigger, we start to feel the urge of craving, our brain is anticipating a reward. What do? That's the next step. Now, again, up to this point, we've talked about building awareness of the cycle, the habit, identifying a response, identifying some of the cues, the triggers, identifying the urge of the cravings, that physiology, that change in our body, the anticipation of the reward, and then we identified maybe some of the rewards. Again, we can eliminate habits by removing the cue altogether, making the action harder, making the response harder, and we can start to associate more of a negative consequence with engaging the behavior. But the truth is that oftentimes we can't control the cue. We can't control the environment. And even though we might know logically, like, I really shouldn't eat this or I really shouldn't do this, it's not going to be helpful for me. The overall anticipation of the reward, the urge, has so much power over us. And that's because we've conditioned ourselves to anticipate a reward. Right? So we start to have the cycle where there's a stimulus, there's a response, and there's a reward. You can almost think of it as how most of us are: stimulus, response, reward. This is where we have to start practicing replacement, or as Charles Duhigg likes to say, the golden rule of habit change, which is you can't always control the cue, you can't always control the urge. The reward is something that you're anticipating anyways, but we can always take a new action. So when we talk about taking a new action, the first step is to really identify what is the reward I'm receiving. So when you think of any of your late night snacking, I already talked about this a little bit, but what do I receive from this behavior? What does it give me? What do I get from it? How does it make me feel? Right? These are really great questions. So I'll just say, how do I feel afterwards? No judgment. Now you might say, oh, I feel like crap because I let myself down. It's like, maybe. But maybe that happens after the fourth cookie. And the first bite of that cookie. First bite. The first time you're sitting there on the couch. How do you feel? And this might be something you just start building awareness around. You might not even be able to identify the root. But if we can understand more of how do I feel, what does this do for me? What do I receive from it? Well, then we can start practicing taking a new action. Now, what actions do we want to take? Well, this is where a lot of people get in trouble. They say, well, I want to stop late night snacking, so I'm just going to not eat anything. And so they sit there and they sit there and they sit there. And there's this massive urge that's happening. There's no change in our physiology. There's no change in what we're doing to meet the need. So it's almost like we sit with all this tension builds to the point where we say, well, screw it. I'm just going to do it anyway. So what we want to start to do is we want to identify the cue. I want to identify the feeling, right? What happens in my physiology? What happens in my body? What happens when I'm about to go and engage in the behavior? And then what is the reward? What do I want to feel? What am I seeking? And then I want to take a new action that meets that same need, meets that same reward. So when you think about it, if I'm late night snacking, there's an urge or craving to get up and get food. I know that I'm seeking connection with myself. I'm seeking relaxation. So then what is a new habit or a new action that would make me feel that sense of connection with myself? That would make me feel relaxed for a moment. That would make me feel like I'm still nourishing my body if I am hungry, but that would be healthier for me. That would meet more of my long-term needs, more of my long-term goals. That could be something like journaling. That could be something like meditating. That could just be sitting with yourself for a moment and reflecting on the day. That could be getting up and getting carrots, right? Maybe there was a healthier decision, healthier behavior. But we have to ask the question, what am I really seeking? And what's going to be the most advantageous for my long-term goal? Why this is so helpful is because by asking that question, what we're really doing here is instead of engaging in the behavior, we're hitting pause. So if you want to think, what is the new action I could take? It's hitting pause. Now, what does hitting pause mean? It's really practicing mindfulness. Mindfulness is the ability to be present with ourselves, whether it's our thoughts, emotions, or actions, and really engage in the present moment. A lot of us live mindless lives. I don't have my phone with me, thank God. But our phone is a mindless activity. We are not conscious when we're scrolling. Right? Have you ever had that experience where, wow, 30 minutes went by like that? Even you think of some of the ways that we engage with our friends or our food. It's just, we aren't conscious of what we're doing. And so until we become conscious of the pattern, until we become conscious of why we're doing it, it's going to be really challenging for us to change it. And so the way that we change it is that when we start to feel the desire to engage, it's late at night, I want some food. I know that there's something that I'm seeking on the other side, but I might not be aware of it. The question the thing that we have to do is we have to sit here, hit pause for a moment, and we have to get curious. Curiosity is the pathway to understanding what our needs are. What am I seeking right now? Ask yourself some really great questions. What am I seeking? Why do I want this food? What am I hoping to get from this? Am I actually hungry, or am I just bored? Or did I have a stressful day? What do I really need right now? What's going to make me feel proud of myself? Is this going to help or hurt my long-term goal? These are all questions that you can begin to ask yourself in that present moment. But if we're not aware of the cycle, we can't. So again, the first step is awareness. The second step is starting to see the full cycle in the moment. Practicing building awareness. Practicing building awareness. From there, the real third step is to practice hitting pause. Practice getting curious. Once we get curious, we can ask, well, what do I want my reward to be? What's the most important thing for me right now? In this season of life, is this going to help me, or is this going to hurt me? And the more we see this cycle, the more we can change our actions. And the more you practice changing, again, that 1% rule, 38% better, that's a new foundation. You change your life 38% every single year. There's a massive compounding effect. So how does this work in let's say, real life? Again, what's really important to understand is these cycles are happening rapidly. And there's dozens or hundreds of decisions that you're making that ultimately lead you to engage in the behavior. Now, to show you how this plays out in real life, so it's not just hodgepodge BS, but really something that you can see in a real life situation, I'm going to tell you a little story. And that story is about me and one of the worst habits that I had to break. I had this habit when we lived in Los Angeles. My wife and I, we moved from New Hampshire to Los Angeles. We're competitive bodybuilders, and we wanted to become pro in the sport of bodybuilding. I don't know about if you know anything about bodybuilding, but it's actually really intense, and it causes a lot of anxiety, right? Or I'd say it's associated with a lot of anxiety because your body's in this intense physiology, in this intense physiological state, rather. And so at the same time, we were trying to build our first online business. No safety net. I did not come from a position of privilege and not have anyone who was backing me. My parents are both disabled. So I was out on my own. And during that time, between the change in my physiology being so lean, being so intense, and then living in the new city, rents, I think $2,000 at that point for a 1-bedroom apartment. I remember like $2,400 for a 1-bedroom apartment. I was 23 or 24. This is an intense season of life. And so I started to experience a massive amount of anxiety. And what happened was I realized that a Diet Coke and a protein bar would help me relax. I didn't know it at the time that's what I was doing, but I built this habit of every time we drove past a gas station, every time I left the gym, I'd stop and get a Diet Coke and a protein bar, because that was something that added a little bit of variety into my life that I could have that wouldn't throw off my diet. And so why was that a problem? Well, talk about reward. In the moment, it wasn't a problem. I met a need. I realized now in the moment, and I started to realize that the reward was relief. The cue was the gas station. You have to stop and get gas almost twice a week. We'd stop and get coffee, right? There's these little micro, let's say, cues. I had to drive past the gas station every day, right? These things were happening. The urge was to get a bar. There was this craving. Oh, I just want a protein bar. I would go and grab a protein bar and a Coke, and the reward was relief, variety, excitement, whatever. Now, the problem with this is I did my profit and loss at the end of the year, and I spent thousands of dollars on Diet Coke and protein bars. That was painful, and that conflicted with my long-term goal of having wealth, financial freedom, being able to not be in debt, whatever the goal might have been at the time. I realized, like, oh, this is causing me a lot of pain. And so, again, I couldn't control the fact that I needed gas. Yeah, I could have, had Lindsay fill up the tank or whatever, but it was always happening. And what I started to realize is there was always this urge. There was always this craving. I'd walk into the gas station and my brain would go, protein bars over there, Diet Coke's over there, boom, boom, boom. And I would find myself still walking that way. There was still a desire to get the bar, and there was still that need for relief. So what I did instead, practicing this whole pattern that I'm teaching, go into the gas station, observe the cue, or observe the urge rather. Observe that there's this urge. Observe my physiology. Observe this intense desire to engage in this behavior. And then what I would do is I would hit pause and I would start to get curious. And what's great is I would almost do this while I was walking over to the protein bars. Right? I would do this and sit with myself while I was looking at them. Right? I would sit with myself and look at the Diet Cokes and just take a moment to think. Do I really want this? Is this going to be helpful for me? Is it going to help me reach my long-term goals? And what was great is I started to think, okay, is this really going to be rewarding? Is this really what I need right now? This is where it gets really exciting. Because there was times where I would walk up to the counter or the aisle. I could see myself grabbing the door, opening the door, right? These micro decisions, these micro habits. I would then watch myself pick up the Coke bottle, right? Pick up the Coke bottle. And then I would even stop and look at it and say, do I really want this right now? It's going to be helpful. And I'd put it back. Some days, though, I didn't have as much willpower. Oh, the craving's so big. So I remember I would walk all the way up and I'd be thinking about it. Do I need this? Do I need this? Do I need this? This is helpful. It's going to help me. I would even walk up to the counter. I'd put it down. And I'd be like, I need $20 on gas. And you know what? I'm going to put that back. And I would take it and I would put it back. So I practiced taking a new action. New action. And what ended up happening is I changed the reward. I made the behavior less exciting, less satisfying. I changed the pattern. Now it's not even a pattern for me anymore. It saved me probably, in the course of 5 years, it's probably saved me 10 grand, maybe more, right? And so this same pattern has shown up for me in learning how to process my anger and emotions, which I made a video about how to break the pattern of anger. Right? It's shown up for me in understanding how to change my eating habits. After bodybuilding, it was incredibly hard because I was used to eating 3,500 calories and I stopped working out like a maniac. I needed to build some mindfulness into my life. And I've helped people break their habits of smoking, habits of late night eating, all these different intricate habits that keep them stuck. And so my goal with this video, in this podcast and this talk, is that you can start to see, if you can see the cycle and you can build awareness around it, yes, you can eliminate it. Boom, I'm just going to eliminate the cue. That might be really helpful for you. It's really helpful for me. I don't keep junk food in my house, not because I can't have it, but because I know it's a trigger for me. Boom. I don't have to have that problem anymore. But if you can't control the cue, if the urge is so intense, ask yourself, what is the reward I'm getting from this? I'm getting something sweet. No. That's the first layer, and that's okay. How does it make you feel? How does it meet maybe a deeper need? Right? For connection, or for peace of mind, or for relaxation. To help you come down from a stressful day. Does it make you feel like you have freedom? One of our clients is like, oh, I like to eat whatever I want on the weekend because I've been so good. And so there's like this disobedient child inside of me that wants to break all the rules. It's like, that's okay. But do you want that? Is that rewarding for you? Is that going to help you meet your long-term goals? For her, she said no. So she started to change that habit. If you build awareness around the cycle, you build awareness around the reward, you can change the action. The golden rule of habit change is take a new action. Take a new action. And that could be a small action. The new action for a lot of you is going to be hitting pause. Zooming out. What am I doing right now? Do I really want this? Just practice and become aware. Practice and become aware. This is something that can change your life over the course of the next day, the next week, the next month, the next decade. And the more you practice, it's like anything else, the better you get. It's like playing guitar or playing video games. The more you do something, the easier it becomes. So I hope this is helpful. Hope this gives you something to really start to see coming together. And I really do hope that this moves you in the direction of where you want to be. One small step at a time. So if you love this video, give it a thumbs up. Let me know your biggest takeaway in the comment section below. And I'll leave you with this quote before we end. It's a really great quote from psychologist Viktor Frankl. He was a prisoner in Auschwitz during the Holocaust. And he wrote a great book afterwards called Man's Search for Meaning. It's a fantastic book. I think everyone should be required to read it. And the quote is, between stimulus and response, there's a space. And within that space, we get the opportunity to choose our response. And within that choice lies our freedom and our growth. So you get to choose what you want to do. If you identify the reward, you can find a healthier way to meet that need. You can find a healthier way to build that habit. And ultimately, the easiest way to break a bad habit is to replace it. So again, put something else in place. Practice, practice, practice. Stay curious. Don't judge yourself. And keep getting better every day. So I hope this is helpful. Until tomorrow or till the next episode, I'll see y'all. Cheers.